The two most important parts of any story are the beginning and the end. One gets you interested in the story. The other one keeps it in your heart forever. Now keep that phrase in mind, but don't worry, I will be drilling it into you several times during this podcast. Welcome to the newest episode of SDW.
Super Dario World!
It's a me,
Dario!
Woohoo! Let's go!
Alright, so before I get into this whole topic, let me just give you a quick reminder that right now the Marvel Madness bracket is up on rock1053.com. If you want to vote on who the greatest Marvel superhero is, just go to rock1053.com, click on Marvel Madness, or just tap on the bracket and you'll find it right there. Also, any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can find me at Dario the Show on Instagram or at SuperDario_World on Instagram. Also, follow me on Facebook, Super Dario World, or subscribe to my YouTube channel. I appreciate it. It helps out a lot. All right, so I've been thinking a lot about stories lately. I've been going through quite a lot of them, and a lot of them got me really upset. Really upset for several reasons. And just to reiterate how I started this thing, two most important parts of any story, the beginning and the end. The first gets you interested in the story, and the second keeps it in your heart forever. Now, just to drill that home, I want you to understand this. In film, there's a rule that you have 10 minutes to get the audience's attention. In TV, sometimes it's a little bit longer. You have a pilot episode. Sometimes people can be a little bit more forgiving. And when it comes to books, you usually have the first chapter. That's it. That's your opportunity to grab the audience's attention. That's why you usually have to start with something with a little bit of a bang. The first scene, the first sequence, you have to grab them. So whenever anybody, anywhere starts a story, usually they want to start it off with kind of a bang. That's what they're going for. That's what they're shooting for. And throughout history, pretty much since anybody figured out this formula, that's even in normal conversations, not even in stories, you want to get somebody's attention. Sometimes you throw a tease in there of what the conversation is going to be at the story that you're going to tell. So throughout history, we get it. Beginnings are, in a way, predictable in the sense that you kind of know that, all right, it's going to be something exciting, something's going to be quick. Endings, on the other hand, is something that nobody's ever been able to figure out. Mainly because you can't always please everybody. You just can't. There's always somebody that's going to be complaining. And so the best thing that an author can do is try to keep, be as true to their story as possible. Try to keep it as logical as possible. Personally, I have always been a big fan of tragedies because tragedies are not predictable. And actually, let me talk a little bit about tragedies. For those of you who don't know, it's a genre. It actually started all the way back in the Greek theater. And, let me just read you exactly kind of what the definition is and what it's kind of become. So, a tragedy is a serious drama typically describing a conflict between a protagonist and a superior force, such as destiny, having a sorrowful or disastrous conclusion that elicits pity or terror. The key here is pity or terror. Elicits pity or terror. Because, for those of you who don't know, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, the thinker, he made an analysis of theater and he made an analysis of tragedies. And what he came out with is that basically a tragedy leads you to a moment of catharsis. And this catharsis you reach after you've experienced feelings of, again, pity or fear. Now, that was the olden tragedies. Tragedies have evolved in various different forms. Like before, humans were very interested in gods. And so the gods roamed among us and the gods punished us. And so a lot of our tragedies had to do with punishments from the gods for betraying the gods, stuff like that. Or it could also be something, I guess in a way it's a destiny sort of punishment. Like if you ever read the story of Oedipus Rex, his tragic story is, I don't know if I want to spoil it for you. Sorry, spoiler alert if you've never read Oedipus Rex at this point. But he's the guy that when he was born, the destinies told his parents that he will kill his father and he will bed his mother at one point. And so they sent him away. He came back and encountered the king, his father on the road. He didn't know it was his father. They got into an argument. I believe he killed them. And then he killed the Chimera, which won him the Queen's hand. And then he found out that that's his mom. And so he kind of goes crazy and rips his eyes out. That's a very tragic tale. You ever heard of the Oedipus complex? You know, when somebody's like attracted to their mother, that's where that comes from. The Electra complex is something. It's the opposite. It's when a daughter is attracted to the dad. Anyway, but that's a completely different character, but still Greek theater. So you can tell that that's a tragedy of destiny. Now, there's many different types of tragedies. There's tragedy of circumstance, which is where you're born in the situation that you don't choose them. In Oedipus Rex, he didn't choose any of this. He made decisions that led him to that situation, but if destiny says that that's what you're going to do, you're kind of screwed either way. There's also tragedies of miscalculation, whereas you made a strategic error and it leads to serious consequences. And there's also the tragedy of revenge. So that's the Renaissance era. That's the Shakespearean era. And the reason why and tragedies have evolved because, like I said before, the Greeks really cared about the gods. As time moved on and the Renaissance era, we started caring more about people, and so they became about regular people. I mean, there were still about kings and stuff, a lot of that, but some of them were just about regular people. And to me, and now, again, it's as time goes on, they become more character pieces. When you just the scale of the tragedy has become way smaller. What used to be a punishment from the gods became a punishment from yourself, from society, a consequence from yourself, and now it's become kind of an emotional punishment. And the reason why I like tragedies, because, again, it doesn't always have to end with the main character dying. It doesn't always have to end with you banging your mom and ripping your eyes out. It doesn't have to end that way. But what I like about them is that they're unpredictable. You're not sure how it's gonna end. Now, in a feel good movie, you always know how it's gonna end. It's always gonna be a happy ending. You can predict it. Any type of genre you pick, if it has a somewhat tragic ending, you never know what you're gonna get. And sometimes it could be a small tragedy. Let's say if it's romance, it could be tragic because you didn't end. The character that you wanted to be picked does not end up being picked. And sometimes the story's better for it. It could be that, all right, I managed a story where you save your daughter's life, but you lose your best friend in the process. So there's usually some kind of consequence, and that's what I like about tragedies. They try to keep their feet on the ground, and life is tragic. There's a lot of tragedy in life, and a perfect example of a company that understand this is Disney. Disney, almost every single one of their movies has some kind of implied tragedy, and because it's starting with most of the main characters, most of the princes and princesses are orphans, or many of the main characters are orphans, or alone, or at least they don't have one of the parents there, and it might not be explicitly told, but it's kind of insinuated, and so I that's one thing that I like about tragedy. It's unpredictable, and it makes characters more interesting. It makes it raises the stakes. It shows you that the storyteller is not afraid to actually, inflict consequence on these characters. And now, I remember I said this in a podcast a few weeks ago, and I was talking about the TV show Angel. I recommended it, and created by Joss Whedon, who directed the first Avengers and second Avengers movies. And he made a rule for the character Angel, and that rule was that whenever Angel wins something, he has to lose something of equal or greater value. And to me, that's one of the reasons why I called Angel the most tragic character I've ever seen in TV, film, or anything. Like, it's just brutal, the things that dude has to go through, emotionally, physically, and all that stuff. After watching another series, it's I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it, and I'll get to that one, because that one really upset me. The ending for that one really upset me. But there's a beauty in tragedy, and like even Aristotle himself said, it makes the audience reach a certain catharsis. There's something about experiencing such negative feelings that gives you a form of emotional cleansing because you're experiencing the extreme example of a feeling. And tragedies, as you know, it's pretty simple to just write something where somebody's life just sucks. The key to them is that you have to really, really care about the characters. So there's a big art to it. Because if it's a character you hate and bad things happen to them, you're like, fuck that guy, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you actually have to either care about that character or you have to care about the character that's suffering. Perfect example of this, The Lion King. I've always said the reason why Mufasa's death is so brutal is not really, I mean, it's because you like Mufasa and he's cool and whatever, and he has the voice of Darth Vader. That hurts. But the thing that breaks your heart is Simba walking up to him, trying to wake him up. Like, Dad, come on, we gotta go home. That's what breaks your heart. That's what makes it truly tragic. The death is extremely bad, but the tragedy is in Simba's heartbreak, all right? And so, again, handling that is very, very difficult. Another perfect example of this, probably the greatest example maybe of all time, Romeo and Juliet, right? And this is actually a double whammy because what Shakespeare did here is brilliant. Now, if you ever get a chance to watch the movie Shakespeare in Love, I highly recommend it. Not so much because it's a great movie. It's an okay movie. It's fun. It's a fun watch. But what I really, really liked about it is that it opened my eyes to something, and you get to see the audience's first reaction to Romeo and Juliet. Right now, nowadays, everybody and their mother knows how Romeo and Juliet works. We know how it goes, and we can see it coming, so it doesn't really hit you. But seeing that for the first time, being the first humans ever to see it for the first time, it's like, wow. Okay, I remember having like a really goosebumps when I watched that, when I realized that for the first time, how we have one of the greatest tragic works of all time and we don't appreciate it. Anyway, let me explain why that one is particularly brilliant. So you got Romeo, you got Juliet who drank a poison but it's only pretending to be that, basically like a sleeping potion, but it puts her in a coma. And Romeo shows up and sees her dead, right? Well, he thinks she's dead. And so you get to see his heartbreak. He's suffering. He's like, oh no, I lost the love of my life. After all this, after all the pain and suffering, after all the blood, I lost her. I lost the love of my life. I don't want to live anymore. And at that moment, the audience is like, no, she's going to wake up. What are you doing? And so you're kind of like in you feel stressed because you want to stop him, but you can't. You're hoping that he doesn't do. You're hoping that she wakes up. Romeo takes his poison. He goes down, and that's when Juliet wakes up, right? So you get a double whammy because then you get to see her suffering. So you suffer for Romeo, who's suffering for Juliet. In the whole time, it's a misunderstanding. So you have that feeling of maybe, and then you get the double whammy of Juliet suffering for real because now you know that for sure he's dead, and you get to see her heartbreak as well. So it's a double thing. Usually when a character dies, it's like, all right, only one person is going to suffer. Here, it's both of them. You get to see both of them suffering, and that's why it's probably considered. It's what's Shakespeare's most famous work. Is probably the most famous play of all time. It's probably the greatest, and it's because of that ending. All right, the tragic ending, the beautiful tragic love, whatever, and that's what keeps it. That's what kept it through time. Most people can't tell you the middle of the story, right? They don't even know who Mercutio is, but they'll tell you the ending of Romeo and Juliet. Why? Because it stayed in your heart forever. You suffered with them. Your heart was broken away. That's the reason why I like tragedies. But also good endings can be with you forever. It's hard for me to compare something with that I think is better than a tragic ending. Bittersweet is okay, but there's something about the tragic, at least for me, and that's personal preference. Some people might prefer the happy ending. I don't know, but there's different types of it, and so nailing a good ending is hard. It's very hard. It's probably the hardest part of any story. And so sometimes the best recommendation that the most authors will give you whenever you're writing a story is you have to keep an ending in mind. You have to know how this story is going to end, and you have to work towards that. Now, sometimes, due to whatever reason, you have to pivot. You have to change. You have to adapt the story. Things happen that you did not see coming. Like, this has happened to me several times when I'm writing something. It's like, oh, well, I mean, this is where this character has to die. So, all right, I'm going to adapt things. I got to change stuff up. Or this is where there's an impasse here. I got to change. Either I got to change my story, force it to go another direction, or let it go where it wants to go. You have to give up your ending or something. But even if you have to change the ending, you have to know what ending you're changing to, because you need to be working towards something. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a huge mess that everybody's going to hate. The perfect example of this, very recent, the biggest TV show of all time, Game of Thrones, has become irrelevant. All right? Think about that. The biggest TV show of all time, a cultural phenomenon that dominated most of the water cooler conversation for years, has become irrelevant. We're in the middle of a lockdown, in a pandemic. I don't know of a single person that's gone back to go and to watch Game of Thrones. Why? Because the ending was so disgustingly bad. It was terrible. Just like I said, and you keep that in your heart forever, and you don't want to have that in your heart forever because it was so bad. You were so unsatisfied. Think about the best TV shows you've ever seen. Think about your favorite ones. Even if you were not particularly happy with the decisions that were made. I know that a lot of people are really upset, for example, Dawson's Creek, the choice that was made in the end or whatever. You cannot argue that it was logical. You cannot argue that it was built up and it made a point. It built up to that moment. And if you really look into it, it started up pretty early in the series, and you could tell kind of where they were building to, one way or another, right? It's I won't spoil that one because it's still somewhat people might go back and watch it, because did I recommend it for binge watching? I don't know, but check it out. It's actually a pretty good drama. But to reiterate, and I'll go back to this again because I want to reset, the two most important parts of a story are the beginning and the end. One gets you interested in it, one keeps it in your heart forever. Now, everything else is your job. Everything else is the author's job. All right? I'll say it one more time. Everything else is the author's job. Every story has a climax. All right? Usually they should be closer to the end because, again, catharsis. You want catharsis at the end. You want the most exciting part. You want to be building to the most exciting part. If you put the climax in the beginning, well, then why the hell am I sitting here? That's my one big complaint about Saving Private Ryan. The most exciting part of the movie is in the beginning. It's the opening sequence, D-Day. And it's one of the greatest opening sequences of all time. The problem is that the rest of the movie does not reach that level, right? It's a good movie. It's a great movie, but the big flaw there is that you start on top and then it kind of goes down a little bit downhill. I don't mean really downhill. It's just a slight downwards motion. That's its big flaw. And so it is the author's job to make that climax the best it could be. Another big complaint I've always had about, and it's one of my favorite movies, actually, one of the best Disney animated movies, Mulan. Mulan made the mistake of killing the better climax. And let me explain that real quick. And this is something that any wrestling fan should understand. The rule in wrestling is the heel or the villain cannot lose the first fight, right? That is the rule. Because if the villain loses the first fight, he is no longer scary. The issue with Mulan is the first time that Mulan encountered the Xiaofeng? Yeah, well, the villain, the Hun, she wins. And basically cripples destroys the entire Hun army. And so that for the following scene, which should have been the climax, it's no longer scary, right? He's already been defeated by the hero. You're no longer scared about that character. And in order to have a good climax, you need a good antagonist or a good villain. That's we'll get into character and setting some other time, because there's a very important thing there. A hero can only go as high as his villain, and if you've already neutered your villain, you kind of ruined it. And so I've always thought that it should have been better if Mulan maybe uses her strategy and beats, let's say, a scouting regiment or something, one of his commanders. That's when she gets injured, and that's when they're like, you're a woman, get out of here. And while the Huns are still attacking the city, that's when Mulan uses again her brains to win, and she would have faced an undefeated villain, right? She would have faced a foe that we don't know if she can take or not, right? That would have been a better climax. But they neutered that climax by making the Battle of the Mountains such a big deal. So again, climax is is the author's job. Everything in the middle is the author's job. You're supposed to be building up to it. And in general, climaxes go at the end because that's the best spot for them. All right? Now, sticking with endings again, because I think beginnings are pretty straightforward. I mean, I can share with you like my three favorite phrases from any book ever starting. We have, well, my personal favorite is the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. That's from the Dark Tower series, the gunslinger. I was hooked. From that very phrase, I was hooked. I was there. I got it. I was there for the whole thing. One of maybe the most famous opening of all time. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. A Tale of Two Cities. Again, iconic. It's got you. You're there. You're going to be there for the whole entire ride. But if the endings for those would have sucked, you probably would not remember it as fondly. They probably would have been forgotten. I'm sure that there's a ton of TV shows that I've seen that I thought oh my god, this premise is great. And then when you reach the end, you're like, this was stupid. I'm pissed off that I hung around for this ride the whole time just because, I got seduced by the beginning. On the other hand, if something has a really good ending, you won't care. You'll be like, oh, that was worth it. It's I can't tell you how many times people have told me like, oh, dude, you gotta wait till the end. The ending's great. Like the twist at the end is great. That's why twist endings are probably so popular, because you're like, oh my god, it's great. We understand that, and we like it. Honestly, if we're being honest, it's something that we really like. And so recently, I've been watching a few shows, and I've been pissed. I've been pissed about the endings, man. One that I'm particularly upset about, and this is going back to the most tragic character I've ever seen. It was Angel. The character Guts from the series Berserk will probably give him a run for his money. He might even be even more tragic than Angel. And on Netflix, I noticed that there's 3 movies called The Golden Arc from again the series Berserk. Watching those 3 things it's a great experience. The first time, the first one, it's a little bit slower pace, but really good. The second is great. It's picking up. The third one is batshit insanity. All right? It's like, what the fuck am I watching? And it is awesome, and it is kick-ass. And you just read, and that's where you're like, okay, so this is where things really start getting going. This is where things really, really go. And then it ends. There was no 4th part. And I was like, what? Are you fucking kidding me? You left me there? You left me in the highest of highs? Like, you reached the climax, which actually should have been the catalyst for the beginning of an actual kick-ass story. Like, all of this was a kick-ass build-up, by the way. But you build it up to this moment, and this moment should have ignited maybe the craziest shit ever. And you fucking end it? You didn't make a 4th one? Are you fucking kidding me? I was really upset. And so I turned to another series that I tried to watch very quickly, just because I wanted some closure of some kind. And the ending for that one is they made the same mistake for Game of Thrones. The beginning was really great, but the ending for it, they rushed to it. You could tell that the author got really, really antsy, and it's like, I just want to fucking finish this. And so they jumped a bunch of steps. That one really, really bugged me for a few days, because it's like, I'm okay where the thing ended. I'm okay logically. but it's like how can I explain this? Imagine that. All right, you go out to lunch, right? And you have your appetizers and they're delicious, and then you have your main dish, and you're having a good conversation while you eat it. You're enjoying it piece by piece, and then somebody and then you bring the dessert, and the waiter just grabs your jaw and just throws it down your gullet, right? Just like he puts his hand all the way down to your throat, and it's like, you're gonna eat this in a second. It's like It's like, all right, I did want the brownie, but I did not want it like that. So that's kind of how that one felt. After that, I started a new series, and there was actually I was reading the series, and it's not finished, so I'm very happy about that. I'm catching up. It's supposed to be ending like in August or something like that, and I'm concerned. I'm very concerned because this series could have ended several times, and it would have been perfect. Like, they've reached perfect endings twice, and they kept it going, and I did not mind how they kept it going. It was still very interesting. It's still very exciting. It's very interesting to see how a show or how a series can still keep itself interesting and relevant, and how you could tell that the author wants to explore certain things, and sometimes some of them work, some of them don't. And I really appreciate when you can see an author that realizes this isn't working, so I'm gonna come back to what I want it to be, or when they do something that's not what the show was supposed to be, or not what the story was supposed to be, and they make it work, or they make it even better. A perfect example of this, let's say it's Supernatural, the TV show Supernatural. It was supposed to be like a Monster of the Week type of show, and it became more of a fantasy thriller horror with a whole bunch of how we call it, with a whole bunch of religious mythology in there. It became more of a story about brothers instead of monsters. It was great. So that's how it takes some time to figure out what you want to be, but I love it when something figures out what it wants to be, and then it becomes something else, and it still works, and sometimes it's even better. Anyway, so I'm reading this, and it's pretty good, but I'm concerned. But you know what? I have to give the author the benefit of the doubt, because they found the perfect ending twice. Again, it's concerning because reaching it the third time means that there's probably going to have to be some shenanigans in the way, especially because my issue here is that you could tell that the story should be done right now. Like, it should be done, but there's still one and a half books still in the way. And so it's like there's a lot of a lot could happen in a book and a half. So there's a lot of shenanigans that have to happen here, and I don't want them to mess up what's already perfect and could have been ended this way. So it was happy enough, it was heartbreaking enough, it was tragic enough, it was exciting enough, but we'll see. I guess that's probably why I had endings in mind a lot lately, because I haven't found one that's given me that catharsis. I'm looking for that catharsis. I'm trying to find it, and it's difficult. It's very, very difficult. But anyway, back to what I was talking about, and to reset one more time, because I really want it to be drilled into your head. The two most important parts of any story is the beginning and the end, because the first one gets you interested in the story. The second one keeps it in your heart forever. Now, this doesn't mean that everything else is not important. They're all important. No story is complete without a middle, right? You can't just have a beginning and the end. You need a middle. And the middle, it's where it takes work, right? It takes work. The beginning and the end, however, takes genius, all right? It's very, very difficult to write a good story. It's even more difficult to create a good ending. To start it, to know, because first off, you need to figure out where's the right place to start it. Where's the moment that's going to be the most interesting for the audience? And then the place to end it is the place where everything's wrapped up and stuff. And a big mistake that a lot of writers make, and or any storyteller really makes, and I'll give this for free advice out there. This is one of the biggest piece of advice I've ever gotten from any teacher that has to do anything story creative related. Never fall in love with a line. All right? And I'll expand that to never fall in love with a character, never fall in love with a scene, never fall in love with a plot line, never fall in love with anything in your story, because you never know if cutting that line, if cutting that character, cutting that thing is the most important. It might actually make your story 100 times better. That you might have a line that's like killer. That was one of the greatest lines of all time, but it might not make any sense within your story. So you can't edit with your heart, right? You need to be heartless when you do it. Take it out of there. Save it for another time. Save it for a better story, maybe. And something that really hurts me, and I've noted, and I believe that it hurts a lot of audiences, most people who watch stuff. It really bugs us when you can tell that the author fell in love with their characters. It's brutal because as the audience, you should fall in love with the characters, right? And I'll save that again for character versus setting, which I will talk about another time. But if the author is falling in love with the character, that means that you know that they're safe. Doesn't matter what happens. At the end, you could already tell what the end was. Like in Harry Potter, you knew that as brutal as J.K. Rowling was with everybody else, you knew that Harry, Hermione, and Ron, nothing was going to happen to them. Nothing at all. In the freaking the Twilight books, you knew that nothing was going to happen to them. You could tell that the author loved her characters too much, and that lady loved every single one of her characters, every single one, and that sucks. It sucks because you are doing a disservice to your story. You're killing your better ending, right? A ending that doesn't necessarily have to be tragic, just could have been like a little bit bittersweet, and would have made it so much better. You could tell that you didn't even want to hurt a hair in your characters' heads. And at that point, the question becomes like, why am I even watching this anymore? Why am I here? The stakes haven't lowered. You kill the stakes. You know what happens when you kill the stakes? Kill the climax, right? The climax, the most exciting part, is no longer exciting when you know your character is going to be fine, right? The audience should never be comfortable with what's going to happen. It should never feel like everything is going to be okay. You should be hopeful. You should be hopeful that everything is okay or will be okay or they'll find a way, but you should never know for sure. In fact, not only should you never know for sure, you should pretty much know, or you should build the story in a way where you're like, you can never come home again, right? That's one of the beauties of the Lord of the Rings. You can never go home again. And even if you go back home, you will be scarred indefinitely, and you have to leave. I guess, yeah. That's the perfect way of putting it. You can never go home again, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You might go somewhere else. You might end up somewhere that you never thought you would be, and you're better off for it. You enjoyed it more. The story, the journey, the adventure. It was more exciting because you did not know where it was gonna end. And you know what? I'm gonna wrap it up there. As always, any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can find me at Dario the Show on Instagram or at SuperDarioPeriodWorld. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time.